Okay, this is Emmy Thomas, and I'm talking today with Borderline Sane. Borderline Sane, I'm going to ask you, what is it like to be you?
Oh, I was waiting for this question. I would say that it's kind of fun, chaotic. Yeah, I'd say it's like fun and chaotic and disorganized. That's kind of the same word, but yeah, that would sum it up.
What do you mean by fun? Like, like just kind of like it's like a party fun, or like, oh, that surprised even me that I did that fun, or
Yeah. I think when I was younger, I used to challenge all of my like hyper and emotional borderline kind of energy into destructive things. But I think like as I've gotten older, like I'm 31 now, I've and a lot
Mhm.
of therapy, a lot of
Yeah.
therapy and medication. I think I've channeled it into like good things. Not necessarily just the borderline thing, but I think I don't know, maybe just getting older and having therapy like has helped me to kind of find myself, quote unquote. Um, and I also have found a job that kind of suits me. Like I'm self-employed.
Mhm.
Um, And then the chaotic element that comes into it is like I am really bad at managing money. I'm really bad at like getting finances in consistently. Um, I'm just bad at like structuring and organizing my life.
Mhm.
And I am quite impulsive. But again, another thing in like maturing, I don't drink or smoke or take any drugs anymore. So I think like when I did, it was a lot harder to kind of channel the impulsivity in something that could be positive. Whereas now, like, I'd say I describe myself as chronically social. So I meet a lot of people all the time and I meet a lot of characters. Um, and I just love like bouncing off other people and being in interesting situations and being creative as well. So yeah, pretty fun.
Okay. So I'm really curious what you said about the therapy, and you felt like you found yourself, I think was the word that you
Yeah.
used.
Oh my God. Yeah. So this is crazy. Like, this is something that I've been thinking about recently. And I know I've heard you describe on some of your interviews, like, um, being a psychopath, it's almost like you have no core or no like sense of self.
Mhm.
Um, and then borderline is kind of the same. It's like very empty, very emptiness. Like I remember feeling all through my teens and like early 20s, just this like real sense of emptiness, especially being alone. Like there was nothing to like, it's just nothing inside. um, but I kind of distinctly remember um, a certain point in therapy where I started to feel like, oh, like I'm there. It sounds really weird, but like just started to feel like, okay, I know what my opinions are, and I'm kind of like fine with holding on to them, and I don't really care if someone else doesn't agree. And like I feel like I know what I'm interested in, and I kind of like I don't just mold to other people, and I'm not like this chameleon anymore. Like I still am to an extent, definitely, but there's just like a more solid core now, which is pretty cool.
Yeah,
I just feel more
I
stable.
yes. So I totally identify with this, but since this, I always try to describe it because I think it's a weird thing to hear for people who maybe haven't experienced it. I even think it's a weird thing for people to hear who are, like who have this sense of emptiness, who experience something similar for whatever reason, psychopath, borderline, something else. They feel like they don't have that core, and I think that they often kind of wonder, like, what's the difference? Like, so I wonder if we could like sit on this for a second
Mm,
and just like really tease it out. Like, so you
yeah,
talked a little bit about you felt like you had like you finally did understand your own opinions about things. You finally
yeah.
did understand. You want can you say, I feel like a high school English teacher. Can you say like 10 more sentences about this subject?
Yeah, okay. So let me just like go backwards a little bit and like try and remember what it was like when I was in the height of my borderline days.
Yes.
Um, yeah, so like I nearly had to like literally close my eyes and go back because it feels like quite a long time ago. But it was very much a sense of like constantly seeking external like stimulus to kind of remind me that I'm real. So like constantly being in a relationship with someone who's like kind of reaffirming that I exist almost, or like um like it's just like the feeling would be like if I'm at home and I'm doing nothing, I would have this overwhelming sadness and just this feeling of emptiness, like kind of hopelessness, but not depression either. It was kind of like it's really hard to explain. It's just like an empty feeling. And in order to like feel good or feel connected to the world, I would have to like go out and get these mad dopamine hits. So like whether that's partying or like sleeping with lots of people or um like falling in love is a big one. It's like a mad dopamine rush as well. Um and then like when I'd be back on my own again, I'd feel like I was kind of disappearing. And I would kind of mold to what other people wanted and kind of like agree with them or not really investigate my own opinions, because if I could kind of almost like feed off of their sense of self, um, then I could feel temporarily safe. But then it was like painful to kind of acknowledge who I am or to even investigate. It just seems so foreign. Um, and like I don't know exactly what causes that. Like I can't tell you exactly what the blurb is in like the diagnostic manual or whatever. But I think for me personally, it was kind of like growing up and having parents that were quite selfish and like especially my mother, like very just unable herself to like empathize or hear me. Like it was always kind of about her. And I don't know if she's psychopathic or a narcissist or what, but definitely like there's those genes in our family. But she was also like she suffered a lot of abuse as well. So I think she was just so unable to kind of see me. And I think I craved that like acknowledgement from her. And in order to kind of connect with her, I would have to lose a part of myself. Um, I would just have to like listen to what she wanted to say and like kind of be quiet. And if I said anything that she even slightly disagreed with, she would criticize me so harshly. And I kind of just learned to bury what I want to, like what I who I was, even just to kind of please her. And like I would think about what I was going to wear before I grew up with my dad, so I would think about the clothes that I was going to wear, how I was going to speak, and like all of these things before I go to see her, because like I was craving something that she couldn't give.
Mm.
Um, and it's really sad. Like I think actually probably your channel helped me a lot with this, to like not hate her and just understand that like she went through shit that was more intense than I ever went through. And yeah, she did kind of pass down the trauma, but realizing that she she couldn't help that, you know. Um, and also just understanding that I could never get that from her. Sorry, I feel like it's going really deep now, but I think like for me, anyways, that's how I understand why I came to be this way. And I think therapy really helped me to kind of just come out of that and be like, okay, don't expect so much, and just like focus on who you are and try to build that up a bit.
Yeah. Thank you for all of that. That last thing you said, don't expect so much. What do you mean therapy taught you don't expect so
Yeah,
much?
I think I think I inherently like expected empathy and love from her as
Mm,
would be considered kind of standard. But if it's not there to give, then you're just fighting a losing battle,
yeah.
and it's hurting her and it's hurting me, you know. So I think like understanding psychopathy and narcissism and like what it is and what it's not like helped me to just accept things and be like, okay, well that's all she can give, and I can't really
Yeah.
ask for much more.
Well, I think it's kind of sad too. The older generation, like I think about this often with my dad, who I kind of think is
Mm.
narcissistic, has never been diagnosed or whatever. But even my therapist was like, he's too old to change. And my
Mm.
therapist also said he never had access to like psychological anything the
Yeah,
way that
yeah,
you have. And so you can't
yeah.
really, I mean, it's a sad situation. It reminds me a little bit, the thing that freaked me out probably most in elementary school, is definitely in the top 20 that freaked me out, is to learn that like malnutrition's like during certain developmental stages just like cripples you for life. Just malnutrition. That was
Mm.
such a
Yeah,
weird thing
yeah,
to learn. Like rickets I
Yeah,
was like
yeah.
so freaked out by rickets. I was like,
I know. It's like suddenly you're like, maybe I will have a veg.
yes, exactly. Exactly. I was like, what is the thing that does rickets? I forget. Is it iron deficiency or something? But
I
then
think
it's
it's
just for
vitamin C.
life. What is it?
Yeah. I think it's vitamin C.
Okay, vitamin C. So yes, yeah, and so you're not getting like these essential nutrients, and then just forever you're just stuck that way. Like seems such
Yes.
like a crazy thing to me. Like it freaked me out because I
Mm.
think it was the first time that I really thought about my future self, like with any real
Okay.
seriousness. Apart from like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Which to me, I was like, oh, I want to be a judge, and I did end up going to law school, so that was funny.
Yeah.
But I almost thought of me being a judge as like my child self being a judge. I didn't actually think of myself as an adult being a judge.
Okay.
Yeah. So when they said the rickets thing, I was like, oh no, choices that I'm making, experiences that I'm
Right,
going
right.
through now are going to affect me forever. Like that was like really freaked me out.
Especially if you have like a cluster B personality disorder, because you're like, you just want to be impulsive all the time. You're like, fuck, it's not always going to work out. Um,
I didn't think of it
yeah, it's
that way.
interesting.
I think, but it's interesting that you say that because my reaction, like more psychopathic minded on our little spectrum
Yeah.
or cluster or whatever, would have been more like I'm stuck with myself. So that's funny.
Oh, okay.
Like your reaction's interesting because like, oh, you just want to do things all the time. Because I think that even though like you have an emptiness, my impression is
Mhm.
that like that the psychopaths go like maybe just another step further and are just kind of like, yeah, there's an emptiness, but they're disconnected to even that sense of emptiness.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like they're aware of it, but they don't feel it as much. They don't
Yeah.
identify with it. Yeah, they don't experience it as much, even
And
as.
with,
But
like when you had, sorry, just on that, like when you had that kind of moment with the rickets or whatever, was it like, oh, I'm never going to change? Or what was it? What was the
it was
fear?
more like I was kind of freaked out that like there was this entity because like my kind of psychopath fantasy was that I
Mhm.
don't exist, no one can see me.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
That's
so
really interesting.
yes, like I'm a cipher, I'm
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
nothing.
I've heard you describe this before and I didn't like fully understand it, but I
Uh-huh.
think I know what you mean now.
Yeah,
Kind of.
and
I'm starting to
yeah,
grasp it more. Yeah.
Arya, yeah, my girlfriend Arya is also psychopathic on the spectrum.
Yeah.
Has like similar experiences of where she was just like, just wanted to like experience the world without actually being kind of, and
Yeah. Like
that
you don't
is,
want the eyes on you kind of.
yeah, and part of it I think is because to acknowledge that you are a thing is like you're so disconnected from it that it seems.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like when your dream reality, do you ever have this experience where you remember a dream like in actual reality? Not like you remember what happened, but you're like,
Yeah.
"Oh yeah, I need to remember to like clean up that mess." And then you're like, "Hold it. That was in a dream that the mess was
Yeah, yeah,
made."
yeah. Yeah,
It's kind
yeah.
of
It's
like
happened a
that.
couple of times. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like an unsettling, like you're two kind of realities. Like the reality you live in does not reflect at all that you are this continuing person, this physical
Yeah.
corporeal
Like
whatever.
my first thought on that is like, would that be because that be like a self-defense mechanism? Because
I'm
if you're
sure.
not partaking in the world, then you don't have to be vulnerable. Like you don't have, if people can see you, then you're kind of like exposed to them. Like you have to partake, like you have to kind of feel or whatever. Like I don't know,
Mhm.
I don't know if that's right at all, but that's like my first instinct.
Yes. Yeah,
Um,
I think it totally is related to that. So you kind of say, like looking back on just your kind of conscious memories or impressions about your mom and like things like you kind of mentioned that you felt like in order to connect with her, like there was at least a part of you that you would have to leave behind to kind of connect
yeah,
with her. Yeah.
yeah,
So I think it's kind of little bit similar in a defense mechanism. Like I don't think this is true of all psychopaths, but I definitely think that it's common,
Mm.
You know, I think,
Yeah.
you know, like some people can have maybe like lesser genes and then maybe this kind of
Mm.
trigger, a bigger
Yeah, yeah.
trigger, and they'll end up, you know, that whole sliding scale of how much do you need
Right.
to trigger the gene depends on
Exactly.
all
Yeah.
sorts of stuff. Exactly. But like why did I develop the way I did versus, you know, like my brother who's just like a grade above me, you know, who's completely opposite, super sensitive, super emotional, super fragile, super vulnerable. Like it has to be genetics too, you know, like because we had
Of
very
course,
similar
of course. Like
experiences
genetics are
growing
so
up.
complex. You can just like look at
Yes.
siblings, like how different physically they can be. Like,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, but for me, I kind of you know, my dad with his narcissism, you know, seeing everybody as an extension of of himself, you know, is kind of how I conceive of narcissism generally. You know, he would just kind of like suppress and punish anything that was like contrary to like his expectations of about what we would do. Like having like a different
Mm,
opinion, no, you have the same opinion as me because you're an
yeah.
extension of me. And he would be violent about like enforcing these
Mhm.
things. You know, he'd freak
Right.
out. There would be like, you know, not just like emotional abuse, but some physical abuse, you know, not crazy
Yeah.
amounts of physical abuse, you know, but some physical abuse. And just I think that as a defense mechanism, I just thought, you know, like why am I even bothering to assert a different opinion if it just
Right.
ends
Right.
up leading to this problem?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then after a while just suppressing, you know, like my identity so much, or you know, it's kind of like rickets. This is why I mentioned rickets, is it's because like you're going through a developmental stage in which you're supposed to be developing your identity actually. You
Mhm.
know, like your identity doesn't come from birth. We know that like babies, or I guess the science kind of indicates, I should say, that babies don't have like a sense of being separate from everybody else, including and especially their mother, until about age 2.
Mhm.
And that's when they start
Right.
recognizing themselves in the mirrors, et cetera, right? So it's
Yeah.
something you have to develop, but if that development gets interrupted, if that development somehow kind of goes askew, then you end
Yeah.
up with rickets, like the psychological version of rickets.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not even your fault. You're like, for fuck's
Yeah, it's not
sake.
your fault. That's the crazy thing. And
Yeah.
so that's what's hard because, you know, the same thing happened to my dad. You know, he also has a personality
Yeah.
disorder.
Yeah.
He also suffered, and it's as you say, like his trauma is worse. You know, I think they're called
Mhm.
ACEs, the trauma scale, like they count it up or
Okay.
whatever. He has
Oh,
basically
okay.
like every ACE that's ever existed or whatever, every possible childhood
Oh,
trauma.
okay. 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 Yeah. 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 Is that the thing? It also includes like poverty and stuff.
Mhm.
That's the one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. Like for yeah, like I have a bunch of theories like within my own family. I recently discovered that I don't know if you're familiar with Irish history at all, but basically we were
I
colonized
watched
by yeah.
I watched Banshees of
Oh,
Inisherin recently.
did
Yeah.
you? Yeah, pretty good pronunciation there. Yeah, okay. Cool. I haven't actually seen it yet. My friend was a stunt double for Colin Farrell in it.
Oh,
So
cool.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, I've heard it's good. I don't know. Does that include some Irish history in there?
Well, so I think it takes place just like in like the 1920s or something. The Civil
Oh,
War is happening,
okay. So the uprising
1919.
and the Civil War. Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Okay, cool. I didn't actually know that. I haven't even watched the trailer, but yeah, we have kind of like in short, England colonized us for 800 years. We have all these songs like "We'll fight you, we fought you for 800 years. We'll fight you for 800 more." So we have a very tense relationship
Mm.
with England. And I was on holiday with my dad, and we both got food poisoning when we came back from the holiday. We all had like 7 days straight of like hardcore food poisoning. Um, and I was kind of pissed off because I was like, oh, this is a month like January. I really need to be busy for work, and my first year being fully self-employed. And but it ended up that I had lots of time just to kind of like do nothing. And I got this memory from childhood, like a weird flashback last year
This was
when my friend.
okay.
Yeah, sorry, I'm being very ADHD right now.
No,
But
no, no. The food poisoning though just happened recently, you're saying, like just this past
yeah, in
January? Or
January.
yeah,
In
okay. All right.
January, yeah. So okay, so to cut a long story short, I had time to like research my family history. And last year I've been driving around with a friend. He's a very bad driver, and he was also like driving illegally because you're supposed to have a full licensed driver, but I was there instead and I can't drive. And I think like I honestly think it triggered a memory because a part of me was like, am I gonna die? Um, and I remembered like guns and like talk about. I remember finding guns in my granddad's wardrobe, or as you guys would say, closet.
Mhm.
And I remember like talks about politics and the IRA. So the IRA were the Irish Republican Army, and they were what I would consider freedom fighters to like get Irish independence. And it just all came back to me in a flash, and I was like, "Fuck, I need to like investigate this." And my mom's side of the family, where this all kind of transpired, um, I would say are just pretty messed up. Like I think there's a lot of cluster B genes and traits there. Um, they don't really talk. There's a lot of infighting. Like just a whole lot of shit, like really bad shit that goes on. And so it's kind of hard to get information. But I kind of was piecing bits together. They're very secretive as well. So like I was kind of piecing bits of information together. And then the food poisoning week in January, I had plenty of time to start investigating. So I started like hounding my uncle, who's like pretty cool and open. Like he's kind of the most likely one to talk about stuff, and he's also really interested in history. And it
Mm.
turns out that my whole family on both my mom's parents, so both grandparents, their families were like super involved in the uprising and the War of Independence, and really tough. Like they happened to live like in the epicenter of where it was all like going down. And I have a theory, a very like not scientifically proven theory, but like just from general observations about culture and stuff, and like seeing how war affects countries and kind of studies here and there. Like it can create, like, first of all, to be a good fighter, like narcissistic or psychopathic kind of low empathy traits are quite useful,
Yes.
because to stay calm under those circumstances is really useful, because it's literally a matter of like life and death, and if you can make good decisions under those circumstances, then you're going to survive.
Or even like,
And
the psychopaths might stay calm or whatever, but like the narcissists, I could see them being good fighters too, because they'd be like, of course I'm gonna win or whatever,
the
they wouldn't,
ego,
they,
exactly.
yeah, kind of get scared in the same sort of way.
Yeah, I don't know what the borderlines would do. They might be just like rocking back and forth in the corner. But yeah, so I kind of was like, and it just happens that like all these traits are kind of on that side of the family, whereas on my dad's side, they're all like super empathetic and like too empathetic, and there was none of that. They were all like my uncle actually on that side looked into our family history, and we don't really have any record of that. But not to say it's proof or anything, but I do think like also from watching the situation in Palestine and Israel, and like I have friends there as well, and there's kind of a culture, like especially in Palestine, of like creating like tough sons and tough brothers that can fight and like resist, and same on the Israeli side, like to kind of suppress the what they would call the terrorist, what I would call
Y-
the freedom fighters. So there's a culture around war of kind of almost building up these traits. So I don't know if like potentially the whole like there's that theory of epigenetics. Like I don't know if you've come across it, but like you can have
Yeah.
the gene for something, and then it can either be turned on or not depending on your external experiences. So I wonder if it's kind of linked to our involvement in the war, and then like kind of as the need for those traits diminished, it kind of like it ended up getting channeled in like really bad ways.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I don't know. That's kind of like an off the wall theory, but could be
Yeah.
connected.
So I have like similar things. My mom is like an amateur genealogist, family history person.
Yeah.
So I can like easily kind of like look up and I have other Mormons do this. I don't know if you know this.
Mm,
Mormons are like
no.
all family history buffs.
Oh, okay. Really? I didn't know that. That's
Yes,
cool.
yes, yes. Yeah. I bet, if you want to like dig deeper or whatever into your dad's side, you just need to contact like your local Mormon. like Family Search Center is what it's called, and they'll help
Okay.
you for
Oh,
free.
interesting.
Yeah, so
That's so cool.
I 100% like connect to this idea, even like, I guess, on multiple levels, right? I do, from like a genetics, epigenetics perspective. I do from like an inherited kind of, way of living, like this kind of family trauma that seems to
Yeah.
pass its way through. I do for even kind of from like this a spiritual thing. I, have like religious beliefs that like my
Hmm.
ancestors are connected to me still, and that
Yeah.
they still participate in my life in like various ways that
Mm.
I'm just like starting to kind of explore. So it is a really interesting thing. I love to look at the family history because you can see like your ancestors really are
Yeah.
you in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
It's really interesting.
yeah, and I actually suggest to people who are like working on kind of like establishing a firmer sense of self, more
Mm.
stability, that like family history, learning about your family history seems to be a very good way for kind of everybody to do this. Like everybody, I think, seems to have more of I don't know what it is. Like when you recognize these traits in them, it's easier to recognize them in yourself. I think,
Yeah.
there's like the way that they just kind of manifest themselves is so kind of catered to you. It's kind of like, as you say, like wardrobe is closet or whatever. It's almost like they're
Mhm.
speaking your particular family dialect. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah.
Where you
Yeah.
just understand it
Yeah.
better than if you saw it in somebody different that wasn't like part of your family. It's easier, I think, to
Mhm.
kind of see yourself
It's
and
like piecing the yeah.
piecing the what?
I was gonna say it's like putting the pieces of the puzzle together almost.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, these definitely are, it's kind of funny. I have a friend who, like, when my mom was talking about something with our like ancestors, like helping to establish some town in Southern California, he said something like, "Do you guys really believe in this shit?" And I was like, "What?" like, like it's pretty well settled. Like your mom had a mom who had a mom.
Yeah, yeah. He's of
But
the like tabula rasa, like you're just born and
I
you're just
guess
like
so.
blank slate.
I thought that was such a weird
Okay.
perspective, but also, like, after he said that, I was
Yeah.
kind of like, this explains a little bit about, like, some of the ways that he acts in the world, like, kind of like, how I
Oh,
said, like, a baby psychopath's dream, yeah, is a little bit tabula rasa. It's just kinda like, sure, nothingness, like,
right.
nothing came before, I'm not a product of anything, I'm not a product, I'm not a product at all. I'm
Okay.
nothing,
You're existing. Fly on the
Yeah, and
wall.
yeah, and if you think that way, if you feel that way, then you're gonna act particular ways too, I think. But if you kind of have like
Yeah,
this
yeah.
sense of like history and connection to the things that kind of came before you.
Ah, yeah.
So I
Oh
I do
yeah.
agree.
Yeah, sorry, go on. Oh, sorry, go on. I think there's a bit of a delay. I'm
Oh,
interjecting.
no, go ahead. I think I was done.
Um, yeah, just on that, I suppose like for me, yeah, I don't know. I've always had this kind of like urge to know more. And I don't know if it's because my family on my mom's side are so secretive. Like I
Mm,
always felt like there was just secrets and things hidden. And I've always been like craving to know more answers. And I think like sometimes it can be harmful, but then like for me, I think it's been a good thing. Like I think like forcing pieces of puzzle together and like understanding kind of the history has helped me heal and has helped me be like, okay, emotions aside, this is why this happened, and like it's just interesting, and it almost turns it from being like personal pain into just like matter of fact, like okay, this is why things happen that way, and it all kind of adds up now, and it's
yeah.
not so secretive and foreign, and you just feel more connected to it, like you said, because I don't know, you understand it better, I guess.
I think too, seeing the mistakes that my ancestors made is like freeing in a lot of ways. I think
Mm,
sometimes we get the impression that we're the only ones making mistakes. We're the only ones fumbling through life. We're
yeah.
the only ones doing morally questionable things. But
Yeah,
like
yeah,
my
yeah, yeah, for sure.
ancestors, yeah, you can see that they're up to shenanigans. They're having like kids out of wedlock, it's
Crazy
obvious
stuff.
that yeah, they're getting into trouble. They're doing these things. Like one of my it's my grandfather's brother. So my great uncle, I didn't have any like direct lines really who were soldiers in any sort of war, but he was in the Air Force during World War II, and he was stationed in Italy, like at the very end of the war, and he was doing like bombing raids into Germany from like northern Italy.
Mm.
And he, like, on his first sortie, on his first like expedition, he was a bomber gunner. So he's in the bomber, but he's in charge of like shooting down like whatever, enemy planes that come after them. But then
Yeah.
he got so freaked out, he just like laid down on the bottom of his little station and just like clung to the plane the
Oh.
entire time. Yeah. And it's like, well, that's the opposite of what you should be doing. And
Yeah, but
also,
it's so human.
yeah, everybody else is counting on you. And so he kind of said, he was like, I was so embarrassed, I was so apologetic, I knew I let my team down, so I
Yeah,
like
yeah,
apologized profusely. But then because he made this mistake, he was like very kind of like, I will never make this mistake again.
okay,
Even if
okay,
it's crazy, I'm still gonna stay at my post and like, do my
right.
job or whatever. And I thought
Oh.
that was like such an interesting story because yeah, he really did like mess up. That was that'd be terrible if you were like in that plane with him, and then you feel like you can't rely on him, but then he makes up for it by never doing it again
Yeah,
or
yeah,
something.
right. Yeah, that there was kind of like a similar thing with so we in Ireland we have Irish military archives.
Mm,
And like so we kind of had a resurgence of the violence in the 1980s, but once that calmed down, they started putting these archives online for you to actually just go and read yourself about your family history. So like if like in my family they were quite involved. If you were involved in fighting for independence, you were awarded a pension. So it was a great way to also like compile the history of the time. So basically, to get the pension, you had to detail all of your actions and like the time of the uprising and the War of Independence. And some of them are like 60, 70 page documents just all about that time. So it's a fantastic like piece of history. And my great granduncle had a particularly just a great way of writing. Like he's just quite witty and charismatic and also like honest. And he was like really short. I think he was like 5'2". And he admits that like, he got shot twice in the GPO, which is kind of where one of the main uh locations where all the fighting went down.
mm-hmm.
And he got shot twice. And when he was arrested later, he noticed that like everyone who got shot in the prison, like during the fighting, were like kind of weak and small. And he was like, oh, I guess I'm like not a great fighter. I was just like the one tagging along that was like easy to kind of to get. And he admits that like he's like admitting that he maybe isn't that brave. He's like he fears that he's not that brave, but yeah, I guess he still fought and he survived just about.
Yeah, I love that story because it's like I don't kind of identify sometimes with the people who are like perfect and were like great and great fighters and stuff. Sometimes I identify better with like this person was unsure. This person was
Like,
this person
yeah, of
didn't
course.
know but just tried something,
Yeah.
because I it's so easy to kind of look back and be like, of course you were on the side of good or you're on the, like to with your kind of hindsight to, but like,
Yeah, yeah.
you know the phrase, the fog of war?
Yeah, 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 of course.
I often think that we are like living our life in the fog of war, like we don't
Oh,
know, like we live with such great uncertainty. And some people are so reluctant to kind of acknowledge that that we like live in
yeah.
this fog of war. So it's interesting though too to see, like, I know what happened in World War II, but my great uncle did not. He
Yeah,
did
yeah,
not know what was
yeah.
happening, what was going on. There's so much, like, I know that it was like this kind of like morally kind of righteous war in my mind, at least, because
Yeah.
especially what was happening with the Holocaust. But I don't know what my great uncle thought
Mm.
about that at all. I don't know if he was aware, if he was just kind of like, I'll just
This is
take
what
this leap of
everyone's
faith.
doing.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, there was moments like that in the pension application as well, where it was like, I fought in. There was a line. It was like I fought in the war because my family were very Republican. It wasn't necessarily like I agreed. It was kind of like, I'm just doing it. And like life is like that. And like our morals, I was only thinking about this earlier before we got on the call. Like, thinking about how people have different religious views and different political views, and we all kind of feel that we're right and that like we're making the best decision. But like, how the fuck do we know? We all have our biases. Like,
Yeah.
no matter kind of how righteous or logical we think we are, we're kind of like, it is a fog. And there's no way of ever really knowing what the most right thing is or the most logical thing, because there's just too many biases. But it's kind of like you just lean, like for me, I just kind of lean towards my instincts of whatever like ideologies are like seem right to me. But I'm also on the one hand like, yes, I'm leaning towards this, but I could be completely wrong. But it feels like weird to not lean into it. So I'm just going to go with the knowledge that I could be completely wrong. And like, maybe I'm leaning into this because like I have a genetic or like, I don't know, like societal kind of predisposition to lead into this thing because of the way I was raised or where I was raised, or I don't know, maybe there's like a natural order of things that like some people are destined to do certain behaviors and others are destined to do different ones. I don't know if I'm making sense. But
Yes.
it's kind of like, okay.
So I have two thoughts about this. One is kind of I'll get to it like in a hot second maybe, and it's like the stories that we tell ourselves. Help me remember that one if you can.
Stories that we tell ourselves. Okay.
Yeah, okay. And then the other one was, it's interesting that you say this because my experience with I guess we called them in the United States the Troubles in Ireland. Is that
Yeah.
okay? Yeah. So, and it's funny too, because I do, as a lawyer, I work with like the city of San Francisco, city county of San Francisco, about like certain things. Like I just sometimes have to look at their contracts. And this, I don't know if you're aware of this, but the city and county of San Francisco took an official position about the troubles in Ireland, and they had to include them in every contract, the official position. And it's still in the contract, decades later. It's still, because nobody, they passed the whatever city ordinance that said it had to be included in these contracts, but they never unpassed it because all these things.
It's so funny to me how on board they are. Like, I don't know if it's because there was such mass emigration from Ireland, like at the time of the famine, and there was always just like a high percentage of us kind of hanging around there. But yeah, it's interesting.
But I would say though, like my own experience kind of growing up in the 80s is that that everyone, so you call them freedom fighters, but I don't know if it's just like my own kind of background. I'm about to say something sensitive. Is it okay about just like my own experience? Yeah. Is that it was like that it was terrorism, that it was largely terrorism, and like anti like it was a religious war.
Yeah. That's kind of your impression of it at the time.
Yeah, that's kind of like how either my parents saw it or like my teachers saw it or something. But I have such a vague memory of it, because that would have been like my pretty early childhood, being like kind of a millennial, kind of a cusper. They call us the Oregon Trail generation.
Oh, okay. I think like that's one perspective on it. Like that's kind of a pretty common perspective. And I guess for Irish people, we see it generally as more of a colonial war because we were colonized for so long, and like due to certain laws, for example, like I hold the belief that the famine could have been prevented and a huge amount of people died or emigrated, and largely that was due to the land laws at the time. I don't know if you know anything about this, or maybe you have another opinion on it from a legal background.
I do have Irish ancestors who fled the famine.
Oh my God, we're everywhere.
Yeah, yeah, we are the same on this, but I don't know that much about the land laws. So, and I'm interested in it as an attorney.
So that was a big thing. Yeah, so like I couldn't tell you all the ins and outs, but basically, like the British controlled our land, and they didn't really know the land like we did, because we had more of a historical connection to it. So they didn't like take care of the land, and like so a lot of previously like great pieces of land that was like first of all they cut down, I think it was like 80% of our forest to like they used it for ships to go and invade other countries and stuff. And then like later on, as they had a land ownership, they weren't really using it for like making food and stuff. They kind of like let the land go to waste. And so Irish people couldn't really till the land as they used to. And they were restricted in what they could do as well. And so the potato famine like could have been prevented. And so there's like this historical kind of background of like colonial kind of laws and ways of being that like was the backdrop to all the fighting. Because when we got our independence, Britain still kept 6 counties of Ireland, and they still have it to this day. So I think like one way of looking at it is like, oh, it was just Catholics versus Protestants, but there's this whole other kind of backdrop of like trying to get control of our own country back, control of our own laws, our housing. Like I think our housing crisis is connected to that time as well. So while typically if you're from Britain, you were a Protestant, and if you were from Ireland, you were a Catholic, like it ran deeper than that. And it was about, but I mean, yeah, like a lot of the behaviors and stuff they were like acts of terror. But they were in response to acts of terror that were kind of committed against us for many years.
Yeah. And that makes sense to me too, because I don't know, again, that much about the, what do we call them? The Jacobites, the Scottish Jacobites. Do you know these people at all?
It rings a bell. Not much.
Yeah.
No.
So so Catholic Scottish people, the only reason I know this is from watching the TV show Outlander. Have you seen it or read the books?
No. I don't watch much actually. I don't have Netflix, but yeah.
Yeah, I think often like religion and politics kind of intertwined in like ways that were just very convenient. So yeah,
Absolutely.
the Catholics, yes. So the Catholic Scottish people who kind of were part of the Jacobite uprising, I want to say the 1740s in Scotland, were supporting Bonnie Prince. Was it Bonnie Prince Charlie? Okay. And he was dethroned, in one of these kind of like whatever it was. But he and maybe his dad was like killed, but then they allowed Bonnie Prince Charlie to survive. But then or I think it's Charlie. But then they Scottish people were like, we are going to reinstall Catholic Prince Charlie. And I think that's why it seemed to be like the Catholics supported him, is because he was Catholic and onto the throne. He's the rightful heir to the throne or whatever. So then there was that like uprising. But I was just thinking this morning about like there's this op-ed in the New York Times about mask mandates not working. And I thought, like 3 years ago, I maybe couldn't have guessed what political alliances were going to support mask mandates or not. And now it seems like oddly so political, something that's just a question of like science. So I totally agree that politics often kind of like seeps its way, like intentionally, I think, into people's kind of like leaning.
Definitely.
Yeah. And tries to kind of like whatever. And I also think this is true that like in every group, there are going to be, I don't know, like it's just like every group has like a bell curve, just like everything else, in Mormons, there are going to be some people that are like kind of extremist Mormons, either on one side or the other. But so not to like be just, I'm done with it, so you're done with it. Do we I was gonna like pivot over to the stories that we tell ourselves. Do we have other ideas about this?
So go ahead.
Okay. So I've been thinking recently about this idea, maybe for the past couple months, about the stories that we tell ourselves. So in meditation, and like a lot of my guided meditation, which is, I always like it when people say this, so I can just like use the exact same thing that they use if they want to. But I always use the Calm app, and I use Jeff Warren,
Okay.
who has like the daily trip on the Calm app for anybody who's interested. I actually get the Calm app subscription for free from my health insurance.
Oh,
So if
nice.
other people, yeah, it's kind of nice. So I think that's why I
Mhm.
chose it. It's not like I did any sort of research.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
but I really like him because he again is, well, like one of these flawed people that, is like,
Yeah.
it's okay to be flawed. It's like the fog of war or whatever. So he kind of like has
Mm.
talked a little bit about this, like the stories that we tell ourselves, and kind of like we sometimes, in order to see things really clearly, need to kind of break free a little bit of the stories that we tell ourselves. And
Yeah,
also, I
yeah.
follow this therapist on Instagram who talks about boundaries a lot, has books about boundaries, and some family kind of trauma book that just came out. Nedra Tawwab, Tawwab. And she also talks about this, about the stories that we tell ourselves. And sometimes the stories that we tell ourselves can feel good because they provide kind of like structure and like a basis, and kind of like
Yeah.
a little bit more certainty and a little bit less uncertainty. And these are, there are reasons why we have this. And then, but the flip side is that it makes it more difficult for us to kind of get out of our stories sometimes and see things
Yeah.
like from a different perspective. Now, one thing that's been kind of interesting about my process, I wonder if you kind of like identify with this at all,
Mm.
of like going from like this sense of being nothing to realizing I am a person. And like not having any problem with the idea that I am the same person yesterday, basically, that I am going to be tomorrow and today, etc. And
Yeah.
that I have certain preferences, certain beliefs, certain tendencies,
Mhm.
certain, hankerings, etc. Is that there's like stability I find there. There's also kind of it's like everything has its downsides,
Yeah.
or kind of it's things like if you take something too far, like this is like a great kind of religious theology belief of mine too, is that you take anything too far, any virtue becomes a vice type thing.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
so I think sometimes people like with this fog of war, it's nice to kind of realize the fog of war and kind of be like, that's fine, I can live in this fog of war. It's even nice to
Yeah.
kind of be flexible about it and be like, I don't know exactly what's happening. I'll make this choice now because I have to act. And even if I
Mhm.
don't choose to act, that itself is a choice, like
Yeah.
there's no kind of getting around that, I guess. But I also am trying to kind of break free. It's kind of like it reminds me of like when I first connected to my own emotions, I was like, this is
Mhm.
terrible. Like, how
Yeah,
do
yeah.
people live this way? Like felt like a puberty, going
Yeah,
through
yeah.
puberty, except the first time I went through puberty, it wasn't bad, but the second time with the emotional puberty, I was like, this is nuts. And it like lasted like 2 or 3 years, it
Oh
was
my
like
God. Yeah.
trying,
Therapy
yeah.
was fucking hard at some points for me. It was like you have to sit uncomfortably with yourself and you're like, fuck this. Like this is what I've been avoiding the whole time. Like, no, yeah,
Yes.
it's almost like you have to get comfortable with pain in order to
Yes.
kind of heal, and like acceptance, because like part of, I don't know, I'll speak for myself anyways, like part of this borderline thing is like ignoring parts of myself, like not just positive things that I might have, but also my flaws, because if I'm flawed, then God, I may as well kill myself. Like that's kind of the way it used to be. It was like this black and white thinking. But then it's like, you know what? I may always be late. Maybe I'm just genetically late. I may be disorganized. I may be reactive, but it's fine because I also have these kind of positive traits. And I think like I guess that was part of integration as well, like being just not being so black and white about things. Yeah, just acceptance really.
Yeah, integration is such a good word for it. Just like these parts of ourselves that we were just kind of like, this is inconvenient for me to acknowledge is true.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So they're in all these little boxes scattered around.
Yeah, compartmentalized, forgotten sometimes, or obsessed about other times.
Yeah. 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 I think
You know,
like therapy definitely helped me to like bring those parts together a little bit more.
yes. You said earlier, and I kind of wanted to follow up on this, and this is probably even more interesting than my thoughts about stories that we tell ourselves. But you said that it was really painful, like to kind of reconnect with yourself, and you kind of touched on it again. What was the pain? Is it like primarily from what you just mentioned as one aspect, which would be the tendency to split, which I kind of don't understand splitting either. So I guess maybe my questions are, could you explain splitting? And second of all, why was it painful to reconnect with yourself?
I think like a general thing that I've learned is that it's such a basic cliche, but the more that you try to run from your problems, the more the less present you can be, and like the less you can heal. And like I guess therapy made me face up to things,
Mm,
um and also just sitting in the pain, like not drinking and stuff, like helped me to just sit in the pain as opposed to like constantly distracting myself, or I don't know, like whatever form of escapism you have. And I guess the pain, like the splitting is like, it's such an illogical thing. Like, and I kind of like, I know the reason for it. Um, like again, it comes down to early childhood experience. Like they say early separation from a caregiver is really key for a lot of cases in developing borderline. And I did have early separation from a caregiver. And basically my parents were both kind of like fucked up. And like my dad was an alcoholic, my mom had all this trauma from abuse and like abusive home life and stuff, and they ended up having this like whirlwind kind of romance. She got pregnant, neither of them had planned for it, and they broke up like before like she'd even had me. So um they kind of didn't know what to do with me. So they were like, should we, like, my mom wanted to put me up for adoption. My dad was like, no. But my mom was like, you're an alcoholic. So what are you going to do about it? And like, I think basically they went to court. But for the first few weeks, I was in foster care. So that was the first separation. And then, like, in that key 2-year developmental phase, I was also separated from my mother again. So I was living with her for 2 years. Or almost 2 years, and just before the 2-month mark was up, my dad got custody of me, and I went to live with my dad. And I remember this like just overwhelming pain, like physical pain. And it's still something, like, even though I feel like I'm pretty well adjusted now and like have come a long way, it's the one thing that can kind of bring me back to that very dark, like hopeless kind of sadness. Like when I think about my mom and like the abandonment and stuff, like my dad said like he remembers dropping me to my mom's house, and like I forgot to say goodbye to him because I was just so like obsessed with seeing my mom, and just, you know, it was just a real loss. It was like, I guess it was like a loss of my identity, because as you said, like those early years you kind of feel like you're attached to, or you don't see separation. I don't know, it's something in there that's like key for your development. um and so that was kind of the first trauma, and it honestly, like, it's still, it's like a hole in the heart. It's like, it's really hard to explain. It's just a really intense feeling of loss, like grief. um and yeah, and then I kind of would re-experience that in relationships. So like my first relationship, my first serious relationship, whenever I felt like I was being abandoned, like whether I felt I would, like, first of all, I was hyper aware of like any kind of like negative mood or like criticism or whatever. And I felt like they were abandoning me. It felt like I was having that loss all over again. And it's so illogical. And it's like, it's terrifying for the other person who's on the receiving end of that, because they're like, why is this person so like psychotically attached to me? And all my brain wants to do is be like, stop that happening again, stop that pain happening again. So when it does happen, you just feel like the world is ending. I just straight away would like seek attention in really negative ways. I would like take overdoses. That was kind of the first kind of re-experiencing of that loss, like when I took overdoses when my boyfriend broke up with me. And it happened again the second time that I had a breakup from a relationship. And then the third relationship was kind of similar as well. And then after that, a lot of therapy. I mean, I was in therapy since I was 13, I guess. I finally started to be able to like calm myself a bit and realize, like, just like put some logic in there and be like, okay, this is, you know, it's not real. Like this abandonment, it's just like, I don't know, a normal part of life or whatever. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's kind of like this intense feeling of loss and panic, like that that something's been taken away from you. And like, I'm saying all of this and I'm like, this is mad. Like, you know, you should just be able to kind of put your feelings aside and accept that it's sad, but not like chase a thing and just accept that it's over. But like in the moment, your emotions are so high and that like trauma from the beginning is like still there, and it's hard to reason with yourself. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, yeah, it's, I guess it's so interesting talking to you because I have heard, you know, that borderline personality disorder people fear abandonment, but it's interesting to hear the reason why, you know, like I've never understood why.
Yeah.
Or what it feels like even, you know, like why do they feel abandonment? Like what does it feel like to them?
It's so, yeah, it's such an extreme feeling. It's really like, it's like physical pain.
It's like
yeah,
physically
it's
what?
even, I don't really feel that. It's like physical pain. It feels like, I don't know. Yeah, it just feels like very, I don't know if you've ever seen like videos of like war and someone sees their parent just die or something. Like it feels almost on that level, even though it's not warranted. But that's what it feels like. It feels like you've just lost like the most important thing to you or the most important person. That's what it used to feel like anyways, when I was experiencing it like at its worst stage.
And part of the connection you think is an association with like a memory, like a triggering of the past trauma of the initial loss of a primary caregiver. Yeah.
For me it very much was. Like, it's funny, like I don't get that emotional about things anymore. Like I'd say I'm pretty emotional person. Like I have a lot of empathy and like I can kind of tear up about things, but I don't like have those really strong reactive emotions anymore. But the only thing that will actually bring it back is like if I think about my mother and like the relationship that we had. It's like it's almost like a primal thing that kind of, I'm like, oh, I'm not even gonna go there.
You know, and it's interesting. I got in this discussion once on the Discord server where people were kind of talking about like emotions. And I said, you know, like there are certain emotions though that are like that do seem more primal, right? Like a phobia. I think we know phobias are they're irrational. They're like more primal. They're like limbic system, like our lizard brain is doing it rather than. So I do understand this, and it makes more sense to me now, I guess, to kind of think of it that way, is that it isn't rational, but it's because the source of the like the entire experience isn't coming from any part of the rational brain, you know, or the conscious brain. It's coming from,
there's no rationale there at all. It's like you're completely disconnected from rationale.
So you'd feel it, and it makes sense too to see it as a physical symptom, because that makes more sense. It would be kind of like seasickness, like where you know you're fine, but your body's like, no, we are like not fine. We're so opposite from fine.
Yeah, exactly.
And once you get like, seasick, it's so hard to stop, you know?
Yeah. I think you discussed like gray rage before, and I wonder if that's like a similar kind of experience where it's almost like it's like compulsive, like it's hard to stop it when it happens.
Yeah, because you're not really making choices anymore. It's is like
it's like your body's driving you.
Yes, your body's driving you. That's such a good way to put it. Yeah, because you know, and that's the one thing that I I understand is like scary about psychopaths. Usually I'm kind of like, they're so rational. Like, what are the chances that they would target you? Like 0. But,
Yeah.
and I think it is similar to maybe perhaps your experience. I think there is kind of something about it that triggers like a very early need that was disrupted, not met, or experience in which there was like, existential trauma, I guess is
Yeah.
probably like the way to describe it. And so
Yeah.
when the person kind of like, because gray rage, when I experience it, it's like somebody who doesn't have authority over me seeking to have authority over me. And I
Yeah.
think,
Oh, that's how it feels
yes.
for me as well. For that thing,
Oh,
like for
really?
the spitting. Yeah, literally. It's like, who the fuck is this person taking over my body? Like,
Oh, so the person who's
because
like
it's,
abandoning you, that's how you feel about that person is
oh
like,
no,
you
no,
did
you mean
this?
like I mean the emotion, the really strong emotion that like
Oh, really?
makes me behave like in a needy or like destructive way.
Uh-huh.
That, yeah, it feels like almost like another person. It's like
Really?
not even me
Interesting.
driving anymore. Like, yeah, to an extent, I guess there's like a separation. Well, there's a separation from your rational mind, I guess.
Yes, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, kind of similar to what I said before, like you can consciously observe yourself, having seasickness, but there's nothing you can do about it, because
Yeah.
it's out of your control. Huh. Yeah. So I think, yeah, similarly, the gray rage, like it probably is, as I'm saying this, realizing this, it probably is triggering like all these childhood memories of like, for instance, my dad and other people being like, no, you cannot have this opinion. That's your opinion. You
Yeah.
can't just be yourself.
Right. Yeah. And even as you saying that, like I feel like I've heard your interviews and like having that sense before even listening to your interviews.
Uh-huh.
Like there is some like fundamental thing from my understanding, like with psychopaths. So they like there is some part of them that's been denied.
Yes.
And while it's all very like, I know you say like I'm not really affected by things, but like I wonder if like deep down, like that's where the likes of gray rage comes from.
No, I agree. Like your experiences, you're not affected by things, but that's not the reality. That's your
Yeah.
baby
Yeah.
psychopath fantasy. That's how you
Yes.
wish things were. You're seeing like only what you want to see. It's like, have you ever seen the movie Memento?
Oh no, I haven't. I'm the worst for this because I haven't had Netflix in years. Like,
It's really
sure, it is a
good
good movie.
for just kind of like self-deception, like the lengths people kind of will go to like only see certain things as reality and to intentionally kind of ignore other aspects of like reality just to kind of
Okay.
like like fit your fantasy or whatever, fit your so I guess this
Yeah, yeah.
does kind of play into what I was talking about, stories that we
The
tell
stories.
ourselves. Yeah, so I
Yeah,
guess I
yeah.
did
Did you?
have stories I told myself, except the story just changed. It changed from
Okay.
like I used to be like I'm nothing. That was the story I told myself. And I would like intentionally kind of be like I'm ignoring anything that doesn't fit that story.
Okay. Okay.
Kind of dismissing it. And now, like, the story that I tell myself is, I am this kind of stable person, living in this type of world. But I again am trying to be like, but is that like, do I have to be so rigid in the way that I hold this belief? Like the
Yeah.
story that I tell myself, is this part of my identity? It can't be, because my identity is something like stable and solid. And a story that I tell
Mm,
myself is just something that's going to change. It's going to
yeah.
change from like month to month, or I'm going to have like some other insight or some other perspective.
Yeah.
And but I think it's
It's like
easy to
a hypothetical as opposed to like a formed
yes.
theory or whatever.
Yes, this has been so enjoyable talking with you. I feel like you're like putting
Yeah.
like good little labels.
Oh, I'm
I wonder
surprised. I'm surprised my brain is doing any form of
yes.
like good labeling because I feel like I'm talking nonsense half the time. But
And
oh
it's
no, I'm
like
glad
good
it's being
analogies.
understood.
Do you find that your mind thinks like in analogies pretty well?
Oh yeah, very much. Oh my
Yeah.
god, yeah, very much an analogy person.
Do you think that's just
Um,
you, or do you think that's partly due to the borderline?
maybe it's partly due to the borderline. I also very much think it's my personality type. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I do think there's some truth, and I remember in that interview with the narcissist therapist lady, she was talking about the Myers Briggs,
Yeah, Willy Wonka, bipolar
Yeah,
narcissist
yeah. She was talking
therapist.
about like how she's an ENFP and you were saying you're an INTJ. Like I'm also an ENFP, and apparently like if you go back to like Jung's theories on all of this, like he talks about cognitive functions, and like the leading cognitive function is just like the way that you use your brain, like different ways that people use their brains. Mine is like extroverted intuition. So that's basically like forming patterns about the outside world. And I find that I very much think in kind of like, I definitely am very good at like connecting dots between like people and relationships and that kind of thing. And like, according to that theory, there's also people who are very much like sensors. They don't have much intuition. They're very much like, I only deal with facts, and I can't like, they're not really good at pattern recognition. Like they can't really see into the future very much, or like they're very much like I don't know. I guess they're kind of, yeah, they wouldn't be able to like form theories about things very well. They're very much like, just give me the facts that are already established and I'll just accept them. I feel like they're more likely to follow rules and stuff like blindly and not like, I don't know, see the deeper meaning of things. So I think there's definitely like categories of people like that. I think you can see it like, I think you've mentioned it before about like people blindly following rules, even with laws and stuff. Or like, yeah, I don't know, maybe like just kind of, yeah, I guess rule followers. I don't know how to describe it, but I think some people are better able to like form theories about things and form connections, and other people are better at like just taking the facts as they come, kind of.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I do also feel like I am a pattern seeker,
Yeah,
like that my
yeah.
brain loves to see patterns. And I guess
And
the
theories as well.
analogies, yeah, theories. And I guess
Like
that's the other, go ahead.
yeah, sorry, go on.
No, you.
Yeah, no, I kind of like that whole Myers-Briggs thing like helped me understand like I have a childhood friend and we kind of would often not see eye to eye. I always felt like she was kind of shallow and she felt like I looked into things too much, and turns out she's a sensor and I'm an intuitive, and we were like, that actually makes a lot of sense. You know, we're kind of speaking two different languages almost.
I
yeah.
almost want to talk to somebody who is a sensor, because I'm like, what's the advantage to this? I'm
They live in the present. They live in the present a lot, and they don't like overanalyze things, and they find like, so for example, this childhood friend that I have, like she kind of just finds things that already work, whereas I want to create the thing myself. I want to like be inventive. I want to try like create something from my own creativity or my own mind, where she's like, okay, I found this system that works for business, so I'm going to copy that exact system and be successful, which is great. And it worked for her. But I'm like, that doesn't appeal to me, because there's none of my own creativity or my own ego, maybe even like in that. I don't know if that's a good example, but yeah.
I often think too that it's like, I mean, not sheep kind of, but a little bit chicken person. The S reminds me of chicken people. And it's not, I've used chicken people before, and it's kind of like a difficult to define term or whatever, but it often is kind of somebody who is not really self-reflective or aware of what they are doing. They're just kind of doing things to get along. Yeah.
That kind of sums it up pretty well.
Okay. So as people have a tendency towards being a chicken person, dang it.
Yeah. They're not afflicted with all this like existential bullshit, basically.
Well, I wonder sometimes, if I didn't have a personality disorder, would I be so afflicted with existential bullshit?
Maybe there's also, I've read like on online forums and stuff being like, intuitives are basically like traumatized, and that's what makes them think so creatively and like differently.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Yeah, it's a curious thing for sure.
Yeah, it's weird too. Kind of like I had this experience. I don't know why I'm about to tell this story.
Go for
this
it.
experience yesterday with my dad, right? Where like we have a pretty good relationship now, but sometimes he does like stuff where you're like, this doesn't make sense. Okay. So he owns like one of these camper trailers. Does that word translate? Okay.
Yeah.
So all right. So
yeah, it does.
So he's up there and we're having like winter storms, right? And so he got from like one of his clients, he got like a pool cover, I can't understand whether they made it specially for him for his camper trailer, but his camper trailer is so old it has a bunch of leaks. So during the
Okay.
winter, he's like, well, let's put this cover over it. But rather than just buy, I guess they're expensive, maybe is why he doesn't want to buy one that actually just fits. So he's always like jerry rigging something.
Okay.
Yeah, so he's up on the top of this trailer and he's like old, he's old
Oh
and
God.
he's not in shape, and he already had been up there before and like had made a hole in like the ceiling, the roof, I guess, of the camper trailer because he like stepped on this spot that had kind of gotten wet and like damaged or whatever. And so he's up there trying to do things, and it was just like like you should have had, because he has like worker people come on Saturdays to just kind of boss him around doing
Yeah.
stupid tasks. He pays them like whatever, $20 an hour to just
Okay.
boss him around. That's his favorite day of the week, And so I knew that he got the tarp last week, and I was kind of like, why didn't you have your little helper kids like do this?
Yeah.
Like, why are you up there on the thing? And my mom's like insisting that I have to like watch him and make sure he does nothing. But then like the weirdest thing was he said he got it all set, and he was like, but there's a problem up here. It's that there's going to be a pool in the tarp because there's kind of like a luggage rack, he said. And so it was going to kind of like make a little depression where water was going to pool. And I was like,
Yeah.
well, I don't think, the water's not going to go through the tarp because the tarp's just so heavy duty, and the tarp's going to outlive the trailer. So I don't think you need to worry about the degradation of the tarp from the water pooling either. And he said he thought it was more like a pressure thing. He's like, you could get like 300 pounds of water up here, and then it would collapse through the ceiling. And I was kind of like, do you think 300 pounds like spread out on a pool is asserting more pressure on the roof of the trailer than you stepping on it, like with your 200 plus pounds of weight on your little like narrow feet? And then after I said that, he kind of like just looked at me, and he knew. Like it just reminded me of my childhood so often, where it's like you just had to come at him so hard with rationality, but he would get it eventually. But that was like it like took me back to my childhood so much to be like, okay, this is how I always had to talk to him, is I just had to learn so much about every topic so I could just boss him up, because like how did like otherwise he would just like say the craziest stuff and you'd be like, I guess, or whatever,
Oh, I'm impressed that it worked, because like sometimes with narcissists, their ego cannot handle it. Like, so maybe you just have to be so firm that they can't disagree, like that they, even with their delusions of grandeur, they can't like, they just can't go further.
I think
try
it
to deny
helps.
the reality.
Yeah, I think it helps that he is kind of like he majored in economics, so he has kind of like a good way of thinking in general about the world. That's how I think of economics, the study of economics. Is like, can you think pretty logically about the world?
Right.
And then so that kind of helped. So you can always kind of like tap into his old economics training. And then he also is an attorney, and so you can tap into his legal stuff a little bit. So he does have pretty good logic, and he prides himself on the logic. And so
so you can kind of override his like wanting to be right with like his pride of logic.
Yeah. Now, if he really strongly believed the pool was going to be a problem, I do agree. He would maybe have pushed back. But I think he was just kind of like thinking out loud, like he had not yet identified. And that's kind of a funny thing about narcissists and kind of like identifying with things that aren't them, that I've noticed, is like he has like certain things that he'll never throw away, some rusty like old screw or whatever, because that's part of him.
Why is that? I've noticed that as well.
Yes, one time he threw away my drum set though. I was like, what? That's worth hundreds of dollars. I guess he gave it away or something. I was like, why would you do that when you're keeping this rusty old screw that does nothing? But
it's
to
so
him,
funny that they do that.
Yes,
it's
yes.
like it's kind of, it seems like an emotional thing, because I have noticed this. Like there's a guy that I kind of loosely work with, and he is like psychotic about these weird little emotional significant things. And it seems very connected to the ego and the ego formation, and like to the point where there's no logic. Like,
No.
you know, we wanted to, how can I say this? So we basically, me and other people that were working on this team, were doing a creative project, and he didn't want part of his work to kind of be refreshed because he didn't want to lose these items, and it just made no sense. And like he had a breakdown about it, and we were just like, where is the logic? Yeah, I still don't really quite figure it out, because he's kind of like, he doesn't seem sentimental or anything, but he has this really strong connection to certain things.
Yes. So my dad will be like that way. I don't know if it's the color red or something, but it seems to be more triggering to him somehow. If he has like red ballpoint pens, he'll like do anything to keep them alive, you know, like add water to them or whatever. And he also has like these red tabs that I guess he kind of lost some red tabs and he fixates on them. Now I have a problem. I don't know if this is related. People can maybe like reach out to me if you have an issue. I'm like so weird about socks.
Okay.
Like if a sock goes missing of the pair, it's just like, wow, like really kind of like what happened, you know? Like I cannot.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's growing up with him or something, but like losing a sock is like oddly like, especially if it's late at night and I'm already like kind of like sleep trained. Yeah, I'll be like totally derailed psychologically by a lost sock.
I do have a weird fixation on socks as well. I have mainly black socks, and I really need to match the black sock to the right black sock, which makes, for a disorganized person, it makes things unnecessarily more time consuming. But like if one of like, because a lot of the socks are similar, like even if one gets a hole, I have to throw out the other one because I can't like mess up the system. But I don't know if that's like a quote unquote like neurodivergent thing, or if that's just a thing like in general with people. Like sometimes it's hard to draw the line. But yeah,
about socks.
Yeah, socks or like little things like that.
I wonder with me, maybe it was kind of like because growing up, there were a lot of times where I have strong memories of like a particularly kind of like rough patch. It was like rough financially and just kind of like my parents' marriage seemed really on the rocks. And there were a couple other things. So there was like food scarcity for sure. Like I was eating what I referred to as gutter oranges. But we had our own oranges. But if I was like out and about or something, you know, because there's so many orange trees where I grow up, and if they like end up on the sidewalk or in the gutter, then it's like, oh, just peel the peel off and eat them or whatever.
Oh, okay. Right. Definitely weren't getting scurvy then, or rickets with.
Yeah. Luckily no rickets. I don't know if I was getting like enough fat for like my brain. Yeah. So then and the other thing is like I only had like four shirts and like 2 pairs of shorts and like 3 socks. So I really had to like for school, which was 5 days, I had to always kind of have like a plan for like, how I was going to like wear all these.
Yeah. It's like a poverty thing, maybe more so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
it could be the sock thing. Yeah. With the poverty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder, because I definitely went through some phases of poverty, and like not hardcore. Well, yeah, sometimes, because like single parent household, grew up in what we call a council estate, so that's like government housing, kind of poorer area. And I remember like shopping in charity shops and stuff, like secondhand shops where everything was really cheap, and people kind of teasing me for looking a bit like not very well put together. Or like I remember once I wore pajamas to school, and like apparently they were like being sold in a shop at the time, so everyone knew it was pajamas, and they were like, why are you wearing pajamas to school? And yeah, so like always like limited clothes. And so maybe I think like I also developed a bit of a complex around that. Like I remember there was a part in my life where I was like, I'm going to throw away the thing. I'm not going to mind everything. Like it was almost like a rebellion of that, being like, I'm not going to feel like I'm restricted to like minding every single thing. But yeah, I guess
when
that was kind of related
mind
to that.
every single thing, what do you mean? Like keep track
like
of it, or
minding
like
my
keep
clothes
it up
really well, and keeping everything until it's worn to the very end. Like I had to like really train myself to throw things away that like not to kind of be always worried about buying something new.
Yeah. talking about this sort of things, it kind of again brings me back to like this idea about like it's so funny, like my baby psychopath fantasy, and honestly is the fantasy of a lot of current psychopaths.
Mm.
If you talk to them, I think that they just like they are nothingness or whatever. Have you ever seen that
Yeah.
like meme where it's like this little black kitten, and the black kitten is like, I am the darkness?
Yeah, I have.
That's how I feel
Yeah.
like it is. Like looking back on my own childhood fantasy about this sort of stuff, because it's like all
Yeah.
this stuff was happening to me for sure, right? Like I still
Yeah.
have food scarcity issues. I still have a hard
Right.
time managing food and making sure there's like basically
Mm.
no food waste. Now, it probably is good for
Yeah.
the environment because I guess food
Yeah,
waste
for
is really
sure.
bad. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's also
Yeah.
I don't want to be stuck that way.
Sorry,
I
didn't
guess.
catch that last thing there.
Oh, it's really good for the environment.
Oh, you're breaking up a little bit. Sorry, I'm gonna move my phone. Do you want to say that again?
It's better for the environment to not have the food waste. Food waste is really bad for the environment.
Oh, for some reason the connection seems to be breaking down. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you, no problem. Don't worry, we'll keep trying. I'll
Yeah.
talk.
Oh, there we
Talk.
go.
Oh, you're back in? Okay. So this is kind of what I've been like a little bit obsessed with though recently, with like these stories that we tell ourselves. Can you hear me now?
Oh, I can hear you now. Yeah.
All right, perfect. So it's kind of these things where I don't want to be stuck in like these rigid patterns. Like I don't want to have to like eat rotten food, like which I have done in adulthood just as like almost like an obsessive thing, kind of like
Yeah.
I'd rather eat this rotten food than to throw it away. Like what?
Yeah.
Like what sort of
Yeah.
like I don't want to be that much of a product. I don't want my epigenetics to kind of like rule things.
Yeah.
So I've been thinking recently about this idea of like blessing versus cursing, because like I guess last year I had been like reading in the Old Testament, like the all Mormons were like studying the Old Testament, and you see
Yeah.
people get cursed a lot in weird ways, like, oh, somebody gets cursed for this, that seems
Okay.
like really out of proportion
Yeah.
to what it was that they did. Like there's one
Yeah.
thing where like these kids are like making fun of a bald prophet for being bald, and then he like curses them, and then a bunch of she bears tear them apart.
Yeah.
That seems kind of
That
crazy or whatever.
seems a bit extreme.
Yeah, so you're kind of like dealing with this idea of cursing. I was like, now I don't really believe that happened, probably. Like I think a lot of the Old Testament's kind of just like, like fantasy or something.
Yeah.
But the idea that is kind of, there are other types of like, well, I guess I just started thinking, is cursing ever like a good thing? Like
Oh my
that's
God,
kind of
that's literally what I was thinking as you were saying that. It was like I can kind of relate. I don't know if you're finished saying, so feel free to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
me
Go ahead. Yeah,
I'm-
interrupt me, of course.
But okay. But like with in Ireland, we talk a lot about Catholic guilt. We kind of we throw it into conversation like as much as we possibly can. After we got our independence, we say that we had a second oppressor, and that was Catholicism. And there was a lot of like guilt and shame, and it was all centered around punishment. And I think like one thing we learned, it didn't work, first of all, and that it just made problems worse. And so we're kind of like changing our culture around that. And just even as you were saying that, I was thinking like, positive reinforcement just seems to work better, whether it's like parenting, like therapy, whether you're like training an animal, like if you like if someone does something bad and you punish them, it nearly makes them more defensive. Like it brings more negative energy. Like there's a whole thing in therapy of like forgiving yourself and like acceptance and stuff. And I think like, I don't know, definitely for me, positive reinforcement works a lot better. And kind of being like, okay, you did something bad, but I accept that, and you can try better next time. And it's good to try better next time because you'll have this positive result, as opposed to like, don't do this, you're bad, and what you're doing is bad. Like just puts your defenses up.
Yes, I agree, which is why I think cancel culture is bum.
Yeah.
Like all this kind of weird, like you are now the new Catholicism, cancel culture. Like you're
that's
coming in like what do we say, the Inquisitions and stuff.
Yeah.
Like you're the new kind of morality police. Like
Mm.
it's so that's one thing. But I guess another thing though is like there's certain things that it's easier for me to see in Arya, certain psychopathic traits than in myself
Yeah.
that I know that I still have. One of them's like difficulty learning from experience. So I'll tell you this quick
Okay.
story. We had a friend come in from out of town who wanted to go to Disneyland multiple days because, she had like a small child. And so we were like, okay, we'll go 2 of the days. We're not going to go all the days that you all want to
Yeah.
go. So the first day we stayed in a hotel, right? And I woke up, Arya started complaining about the family next to us being so loud and rude and like
Yeah.
inconsiderate or whatever, right? And I don't know if I asked her if she had earplugs, if she had brought earplugs, or maybe I always sleep with earplugs all the time. So I
Yeah.
slept through it all, right? And then we ended up like a few days later, we are gonna go back to Disneyland. And I was like, let's just stay at the same hotel, like we already know what's happening
Mhm.
there. And so we stay at the same hotel. And she woke up again and she was like, yeah, the people next to us. And I was like, were you wearing earplugs? And she was like, no. And I was kind of like, what is wrong with
Why?
you? You did this twice in a row. Why? Like, why would you do this twice in a row? So I sometimes see stuff in her where I'm like, yeah, that's kind of a trait of psychopaths, is that they have a hard time learning from experience. I think partly to explain it, like it has to do a little bit with the psychopathic baby psychopath fantasy, which is like nothing bad happens to me because I'm nothing, right? And so you kind of like memory hole the bad stuff really quickly to where you don't remember it, since you don't kind of remember that pain. Like pain can actually help you learn, like if you
Yeah.
like touch the hot
Yes.
stove and yeah. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
guess, yeah, I've been thinking about recently, like this idea of cursing, and like, I almost have to be like, confronted with something. Sometimes I just have to be confronted with things like kind of like
Yeah.
my dad, like so hard in order for it to kind of get through like my like thick skull, I guess, like the stories that I tell myself to understand,
Right.
like, hey, I have been ignoring this, or I have been like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I been doing this over and over again and it's stupid, or whatever else it is. So I keep thinking about this idea. There's like a in the Messiah, the oratorio by, is it George Friedrich Handel, I think are his first
Oh,
two
you're
names.
breaking up there. Connectivity is not great.
Oh, I wonder if it's me. Can you
Not
hear me
sure if it's
now?
me or you. Not really. I wonder if it's your snowstorm, because I seem to have high coverage.
Okay, it could be the snowstorm. Yeah, it really could be, because there's like all this all this weird weather activity. But can you hear me now?
I think I can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay. So there's this
Yeah. Yeah. You're
song.
back.
Okay. There's this song in the Messiah that is saying, now I wish I remembered it exactly, like, thou shalt break them. Thou shalt break them
Okay.
in pieces. And when I first would listen to that in the Messiah, I'd be like, that's kind of a weird thing to say about like Jesus, is that he's going to
Yeah.
break them in pieces. But now I actually ask, like in my little prayers, I ask to be broken in pieces, because I don't want to just be uh I don't want to just be stuck in the stories that I tell myself.
Mhm. What are like the best ways for, like, can you give me an example of, like, you mentioned your dad, like what kind of things help you break the stories?
I guess that's the hard thing, is because, like if you're so caught up in it, it's like being caught up in the fog of war. It just
Yeah.
feels like every thought that you would have is coming from you, and it's already part of you, and what you really need is something that's not part of you
Yeah.
to like break
Yeah,
it.
it's kind of like this reminds me of, like, just a friend recently was talking about, we're both like quote unquote neurodivergent. Like, I also have ADHD and they are on the autism spectrum, so we kind
Mm,
of like bonded pretty well and like have a lot of similarities in the way that we think. And they were talking about managing a project for the first time, which can be quite difficult, managing people with autism when you have like social skill issues.
mm.
And like at the end of it, they were like, I wonder if I was a good leader, and I wonder if I can be better. And I was like, ask for advice, like or ask for feedback. And sometimes that can be like the hardest fucking thing ever. Because yeah, sometimes you don't want to know, you don't want to hear the negative things because they're harder to face. But then if you do hear them, it's actually going to help you be better next time. So like, it's good to like, I don't know if that relates to what you're saying, but kind of just getting the truth, like even if it kind of stings a little bit or if it doesn't match up with your story.
Exactly. And I guess like the thing that kind of really has motivated me recently, I'm so obsessed with it that I've like mentioned it several times in this conversation. But the thing that really has motivated me is seeing like the older people I know that I have been stuck in these weird stories forever and, you know, have just like lived their lives out that way. And it's so funny because like I tweeted this recently. I asked my mom, like maybe like 9 months ago or something, like why does she think that her people of her generation and the generation above her would kind of like help hide sexual abuse in their communities?
Yeah,
Because it wasn't just the perpetrators, it was like they were enabled, you
absolutely.
know, by the
It
whoever,
thrives in
whatever,
secrecy.
leadership, the community, you know, like they were just kind of like, let's not make a big deal about this. Let's sweep it under the rug. And like, why? And she kind of, her guess, one of her ideas was she just thought that people thought maybe that it was such a prevalent problem. It was so widespread that if they started kind of like, you know, punishing all the perpetrators, then like the very threads of fabric would tear,
Yeah.
and especially during
Yeah.
like the Cold War in the United States, where it's like, well, our major enemy is like the USSR, right? And the Soviet bloc. And we always have to be better than them, you know, because we have to show that democracy is better and it's better for
Okay.
everybody. And, you know, et cetera, et cetera. I would imagine that the pressure was to be like, well, we can't kind of allow people to understand that we're flawed.
Yeah. Right.
Our society is still flawed.
Oh my God. There's something so true in that. And like, there's this common like phenomenon, and it's called like the oppressed becoming the oppressor. And you
Yes.
kind of see like that happening. Like some people would say that Israel is kind of like the embodiment of that. Like the
Mhm.
Holocaust happened to them, and now they're like kind of doing the Holocaust to the Palestinians. Like, I don't know what people would say politically about that, but that's just an example that I've heard. And
Mhm.
like, um, you kind of, yeah, hang on, I lost my train of thought there. What was the point that you had just said before?
I think I wonder,
Um,
so I guess my question is like, is that a little similar to like borderline splitting? You know, where
oh,
it's like
okay.
we can't really acknowledge that we're flawed. It's better kind of what you said before, like if I acknowledge that I'm flawed, I might as well be
I might as well kill
dead.
myself. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's such like an interesting story that you tell yourself, you know, and it's
Yeah.
also maybe kind of like the premise though of a lot of stories that we tell ourselves, which is, you know, if I'm wrong about this, then I might as well be dead because we tend to defend some of these like as if
Yeah.
they
We
were
make
an
up a fake
existential threat.
story.
Yeah.
We make up a fake story that works maybe for some aspect or whatever, but it's actually a logical fallacy. It's like it's like A plus B equals C, but it doesn't actually, but you have that so firmly like in your belief system,
Hmm.
and like had to slowly realize that actually the equation is wrong.
Yeah.
um but yeah, I just had another thought like on that note, like, you know, with Catholicism we had a lot of sexual abuse kind of cases afterwards, and I do wonder if like part of that was like, fallout from the war.
Oh.
um I just wonder if that does increase, because like that's another thing that was kind of prevalent in my family on the war side, that I just wonder like, do those things kind of tie in together? It's like,
Hmm.
oh yeah, I forget the guy's name, but there's this guy, and his dad survived the Holocaust, and he's now like a psychiatrist, and I think it could be Gabor Mate, but I'm not sure if it's him. And he kind of talks about this notion of the oppressed becoming the oppressor, and like
Hmm.
how in a lot of war-torn regions, domestic violence skyrockets, and
Mm.
like femicide and all these kind of things. And it's like this thing of the oppressed. I mean, you know, the whole idea of like hurt people hurt. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I kind of, there's some truth in that, I guess.
One time, one thing I've kind of thought about recently is like to the extent that people take on to like an identity of I'm of an oppressed group. Therefore, I
Mm,
cannot oppress others. I am only oppressed is an
yeah,
interesting
that's
one. I've
bullshit.
seen people use that before to like defend, using like slurs against
Yeah,
people
yeah,
or,
yeah, yeah,
like treating people like the very same way that they say is oppression.
yeah, for sure. Um, like, oh, I can't I can't be a racist. I have a black friend or whatever, or I'm Asian. I can't hate black people. I'm Asian.
Or I can't
Would
be
that be an
racist, I'm
example?
black.
Yeah, 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 exactly.
Like, I could like, I have friends that one time I think maybe I've mentioned this before, like, in a previous one. Somebody worked, for a Japanese, corporation in an office in the United States. There was a white woman in that same company who said that she was being racially and gender discriminated against with regards to promotion, that other Japanese, men were being promoted over her.
Mm.
Think that's like a legitimate complaint, but they were like, "She shouldn't be complaining, she's white, there's no such thing as white oppression." And I was like, "Well, I don't
Yeah,
know why okay, white oppression, but can she be discriminated against, this one person, this one white lady?" I mean, she's
I
not
guess in
white
that one scenario she
monolithically.
could. It's like
Yeah,
it's
like,
not
that's
the standard thing, but like yeah,
yeah.
it probably was the case. Like it probably was true in that case, but it doesn't
They
fit like
went
the
even
overall
fu
narrative.
Yeah, they went further than that. They didn't say it's not that she's not being oppressed, they said even if she is being discriminated against, who cares?
Right.
Yeah, it's, like, not important because it's like, "Oh, there are other things more important." That sort of stuff,
But it
I have a
obviously was
hard time.
important to her in her life. So,
Yeah,
but they were
and it's
like,
kinda
nope.
yeah, it's like an odd, like, only certain people can be oppressed, like, I don't know. It's
Yeah,
interesting.
it is
That's
interesting. I think like yeah, you brought it up before of like the whole area of like pedophiles, which is a
Mm,
very tricky area and like but like you made some interesting points on that I think like psychopaths are very good at that. They can kind of see the logical fallacies and because you're coming from a such different perspective that
mm.
like I know myself that I've been guilty kind of maybe doing that, like kind of thinking in those terms. Like I don't know, like my brother he developed schizophrenia from weed. And so for a
Mm.
time, my emotions, like, it's a thing. You can get like weed induced
No,
bipolar. It's,
absolutely.
yeah.
There was, like, some other video we did where this person's, like, kind of told me this, and I, like, looked into it. It's, like, a total thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not that well known, but it's becoming more common. And like basically the quality of weed, if there's more THC as well. And
Mm.
you're particularly more vulnerable if number one, you have a genetic predisposition, like genetic marker for it. And number two, if you smoke a lot before you're of a certain age, and like he was doing it from a
Yes.
really young age. So unfortunately it did trigger schizophrenia. Um oh my god, where was I going with this? Sorry. ADHD brain, I'm like forgetting my train of thought.
Yeah, you said you have a tendency you
Oh
talked
yeah.
about pedophilia?
Yeah, okay, yeah. So I had this like really emotional reaction for some time, like weed is bad, like weed is
Mm.
like the worst thing ever and we should ban weed. And then like it took me a while to realize that actually probably the reverse, like legalizing weed and having like higher quality weed could actually be more beneficial and cause less cases of this. But it was like um it's just this very emotional thinking.
Yeah.
uh I think it like kind of ties in with what you're saying. Like um people kind of can be blinded to what the most logical thing is to do, or like maybe even what the most empathetic thing is to do because of their own experiences or their own personal traumas or like whatever it is.
Yeah, for some, I think it's, I don't know what it is that I observe in normal people because it's funny that you say this because in California, where I live, it's almost the opposite. Like people are like, weed is like the sacrosanct, sacrament that is like,
Yeah.
like if you're not like 420 friendly, then you're basically like what, you're just kind of
Yeah, yeah.
stupid and like a prude. And I always think like, what? Like, can we find like a happy medium? Like, it is
Yeah, yeah,
true
yeah,
that
exactly.
yeah, like psychedelics do help. You can talk to people about that. They can also be destabilizing. Yeah, psychologically
Yeah,
destabilizing. And I
there's
don't know what
nuances.
yeah, there's nuances.
There's
I guess that's what
nuances.
I'm kind of trying to say is like
Yeah,
so much
and
of the
I think like
story.
yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, yeah. No, I think that's like so I think if you have a personality disorder or even maybe just neurodivergent, you do tend to see things from a different angle. And like
Yes.
maybe a bit of bitterness from suffering kind of makes you like, "Oh, fuck these people and their basic ways of thinking." Like
Yes.
they just like, they don't even see their biases. And like, I don't know, I think it is kind of like a commonality that you tend to see some contradictions in the way that people think because they've kind of had it easier and they haven't had to like deal with this existential shit as much or something like that. I
Mhm.
don't know.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And I
I kind of get where
I
you're coming
think
from.
yes, what bothers me, yes. Fuck these people in this shit. Yes, I think what bothers me about kind of the things is like when they make a shift, it so often seems to be what you identified as the oppressed become the oppressors, right? Like I was
Yeah,
watching
yeah.
The White Lotus season 1, which you probably haven't seen.
Okay. I've heard about it. I have heard about it.
Yeah, and
It's like
I'll
rich
keep it
people
kind
and
of
a murder or something. Yeah.
yes, rich people that are murderers. So I'll kind of keep it
Okay.
generic, but like one of the
Yeah.
characters kind of says something to the effect, a younger character, says something like, who cares about uh young white kids? Like it's white men have had it easy or whatever for so long that now it's time for other people to eat. It was kind of like the quote. And
Mm.
I found that to be, like, so off-putting because it, like, dehumanizes basically anybody, who's male and white, and it's like well, especially
Yeah,
like,
it goes
I
too
have
far in the other direction.
yeah, I have, like,
Yeah, yeah.
preschool nephew or something, and I'm like, "This kid is Bum Bum?" Like, he's
Yeah,
not.
yeah.
Like, you
Yeah.
guys are crazy to say that this is
Yeah,
true
yeah.
of him. He had nothing
Yeah,
to do with this.
it's like jumping too much on this like yes, there's truth in that. And like, there is elements of the patriarchy and stuff, but like you don't need to turn it into like let's kill them, let's burn them at the stake. Like
Yeah,
there's more nuance to that. And also
yeah.
that's not gonna like if there is some truth in it, like putting it that way is just gonna create more division and not really get anywhere.
Mhm.
I think it's like part of the reason why there's such a dramatic rise in like, people like Andrew Tate being like these cultural kind of leaders. And then there's like so much, it's like gone in these opposite polar directions.
Yes.
Um, and it's like losing the nuance. I think like social media is part of that as well. And like even YouTube and stuff, that once you see one thing, the algorithm shows you that over and over again.
Right.
Oh yeah.
I think it is interesting though, because like even kind of the language that we use. Like I saw a recent discussion about this. Like somebody who is cisgender male
Mm,
said, I don't want to be called cisgender. Can you please just call me male? And the person
okay.
was like, well, cisgender is what you are. And I
Okay.
was like, I guess so, but cisgender is just a word that somebody like made up. Like this is all just like words that people have made up, but kind of like the idea being, and this is kind of interesting because my girlfriend, Arya, does find for whatever reason, does like to see representation in media of her, specifically female psychopaths
Okay.
characters. And I'm kind of like, yeah, it's fun, but I don't feel like that kind of like changes for me. Maybe it's because she's like younger, like quite a bit younger, and maybe kind of like of a
Mm,
different generation. But I think it's
yeah.
kind of funny that like the response to kind of a conversation about this, like media,
Hmm.
somebody suggests to the cisgender male dude who is like, like it seems like there's sometimes propaganda, political propaganda
Okay.
and shows that like pop him out of what do we call it? The suspension of disbelief. Like
Okay.
you're trying to get caught up in a show and have your disbelief suspended.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? like absorbed. But when you kind of hear like a propaganda or like a like an explicit nod to like a woke term or something, then
Okay.
maybe that could pop you out. So that was his comment. And then somebody was like, you can just make your own shows then or something. And I kind of get that, but I also think like if like kind of let's take like 1950s television or something where they're like famously married couples are famously sleeping in double beds, you know, it's so desexualized, right? If
Yeah.
that was kind of like one extreme, like why would you want it to go to like the other extreme? It's almost like nobody wants to actually deal with nuance. They just want to replace like what's the dominant culture with their dominant culture. They don't really want, it
Yeah.
doesn't seem like anybody really wants to make an environment in which everyone can thrive equally. It seems like they want
it happens. Yeah, I feel like it happens every once in a while where there's like a generational shift, and like you kind of saw that in the 70s where people were like, let's just be free, and like it ended up being like really irresponsible in places where he kind of, I don't know, like I think of Leonard Cohen. This is one thing that I watched, like Leonard Cohen. Are you familiar with him?
yeah, the musician, the composer,
Yeah, so
singer.
there's a documentary about him, and like just had like a really like typical kind of like relationship and child like of the 70s, and like they were just taking drugs all the time, and like I think one of the kids ended up dying because nobody was watching him, and like
One of
it
his
just kind of,
kids?
I don't know if it was his kids or one of the kids in the group, like they were all just on this island like taking drugs, and it was all like freedom and sex and like, but it was so like opposite. And I think it just like in some cases it went too far with the experimentation into being like irresponsible.
Yeah.
And then that kind of got reined back a little bit. I feel like every generation is kind of pushing the boundaries and changing the language. And part of it is to get more nuance and to be like, okay, there are trans people or non-binary people or whatever. And then part of it like goes too far to being like, no, this is the only way. And like this group trumps this group because they were oppressed. And like, even with feminism, I kind of am sick of the word feminism at this point. Like, while I'm very much like a, what would you say, like an advocate for like survivors of sexual abuse and like, you know, serious kind of like problems like that, I do also think like sometimes it's all people talk about it, and you're kind of like, there's other problems going on. Like there's really horrific poverty in Ireland at the minute. Like there's wars going on, but like,
which is not to say their trauma is not.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. But sometimes it's just a little bit like blind to the nuance and like the other things that go on. So
I feel this way in general with Eat the Rich, because most people saying Eat the Rich are still part of like the top 15% of the world. You know, like you are rich. You are rich compared to,
and I'll eat them. I'm hungry.
Yeah, 85% of the world though like lives on like, what is it? $30 or less per day is 85% of the world. So what is 30? It ends up being like $15,000. I don't know what the currency is where you are.
Okay. Yeah. It's not that different anymore, actually.
Yeah. So it's crazy though, like the amount of global poverty. Like whenever anybody's kind of like, well, you know, these people just deserve this or something, deserve these resources. I always think, you know, we could like be saving like lives upon lives with those resources if we just like ship them to where they like are truly needed. And if you're just talking about like moving from like one socioeconomic level to another in like a first world country, then like it's not saying that that's not an issue. It's just kind of saying like it, certain comments suggest is that's the most important thing and we're just like the stupidest to not do it. And I think it's just more complicated, I guess. Than people want to allow it to be. And I guess that people want it to be simple, maybe because they're S's, they're and not the intuitives. What does the S stand for again?
The censors.
The censors.
Yeah. I feel like they cause half the world's problems because there's apparently a lot more censors than there are intuitives. And like, you know, they have the voting power, they have like, they're just more well represented, I guess. But I don't know. That could be my bias because I'm an intuitive.
I also now have this bias that you've explained it to me. Or I'm like, huh. Like people
Those
want to
damn sensors.
oversimplify things. Yeah, I think they want
Yeah,
things to be
no, it's so
simple.
true. Like, we all fucking do it. It's hard not to do it.
Oh,
Like,
absolutely.
oh,
I know that I
the
do it.
empath
I'm
does
trying to
this,
get
or
out
the
of.
sociopath does this, or the borderline does this, and then it's like, oh no, you have to like rein it in. And but our
I
brain just
know.
loves to categorize things because it's easier to do.
Oh, absolutely. And somebody commented this on one of the YouTube videos recently, as to, saying basically that, like, oh no, this can't be that because psychopath's always this, or
Ugh, yeah.
borderline's always that, or whatever.
Oh, that's so frustrating because you know the whole like Amber Heard thing. I'm
Oh
like
yeah.
afraid to say that I'm borderline because
Oh,
of
really?
like well, just generally anyways, because of like I don't know, I think people just automatically think like bunny boilers or whatever. Like but yeah,
Yes.
I just feel so far removed from her behaviors
Mm.
and like the way that they transpired. But like seeing all the commentary on borderlines, like I kind of got caught up in that whole storm and just being like, there was like this almost like witch hunt, like, you know, oh, this person was a borderline and she did this horrific thing. And I'm like, you don't even know if they were borderline. And like, you're attributing all these like really crazy extreme things now to borderlines when, you know, it's not that crazy or like it's not always, there's levels to it and there's like such a wide range of expression. Kind of
Yes.
like, like, oh, all psychopaths are serial killers or whatever. And it's like,
Yes.
no, there's levels
Yes.
to it.
Yes, and I
There's
feel like maybe
levels.
I've said this before in like a video that you may have watched because you kind of referenced it a little bit. But
Mm,
interestingly, in California, this is true currently of the criminal
mm,
justice system in California, is that there's something called mental health diversion, where if you
okay.
kind of if you have a mental health issue that contributed at least in part, this is just kind of a paraphrase. Look up
Yeah.
the exact whatever. But if you had a mental health condition that contributed in part to your criminal offense, instead of serving time, you can be what's called diverted into treatment for your
Oh,
mental health condition.
yeah.
And there are three exceptions. And maybe they're obvious or maybe they're not, but you can probably guess why I'm mentioning it. One of
Oh,
them's
great.
psychopath, second one's pedophile, and the third one's borderline. And I think the
Fuck's
borderline
sake.
one is I know is the worst because there's like clear treatments for borderlines that like
Yeah,
have
like it's the
amazing
only
degrees of success.
yeah, like I mean, I don't even know if I would still meet the criteria for it because apparently it's the only personality disorder that you can actually fully recover from or like not qualify
Wow.
for anymore.
I feel the
That's what
same
I've
actually
read
about being a
so
psychopath a
far.
little bit. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I feel like I probably don't meet the criteria for it anymore. I don't feel
Oh,
like I'm fully
interesting.
recovered. Like I don't feel
Yeah,
effective empathy still, like that automatic
yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
Probably the
yeah.
brain plasticity, that's like done for, like, I'm too old or whatever to develop that now. My brain's like decrepit. Like can't remember anything.
I know it's shit, isn't it? The way like when you learn some things later on, you're like, oh fuck. Like when I got diagnosed with ADHD later on, I was like, damn it, if that had happened in school, I probably would have had 5 degrees. Well, I probably wouldn't have had 5 degrees, but like maybe I would have done better in formal education. But
Yeah.
yeah, definitely like the therapy from a young age, I honestly think saved my ass because
Mm,
it's kind of quite an extreme difference. But I guess I got therapy in my formative years, so it was really helpful.
yes.
Um, but even so, I think people can always make changes, whether or not
Yes,
it's going to be a
yes.
dramatic change or not. Like you can. It's never too late to implement some positive change.
I love this. This is such a good way to end this because we've
Yes.
been chatting for a long time. But
Yeah.
yeah, for I think early intervention is so key. And for psychopaths, there actually is early intervention treatments that are like, well, like paid for by uh insurance and stuff. They're like
Nice.
acknowledged, but they don't call them psychopaths. They call them callous emotional kids, I think. Callous
Okay.
unemotional. Callous
Okay.
unemotional kids, and there's, I think oppositional defiance disorder is what they're
Mm,
called when they're very little.
yeah.
Not saying that every one of those kids turns out to be a psychopath, but
Yeah.
there's certainly like a little bit of uh, a
Correlation or
pathway
whatever. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
to it.
Yeah. That's
So,
great though.
yeah.
The more that we have of this, the better. Like Yeah, like, yeah, I think it's never too late to make positive change. I've seen people change in their 40s, like from bad behaviors and even mellowing out as they get older as well. But yeah, if the more like earlier intervention we have for these kind of things, the better.
And I'll do like a little bit of pitch for people who have like these types of things for psychopathy, and then maybe you can think of like some resources that you can think of to direct people to. But
Yeah.
one of my favorite psychopathy resources is Psychopathy Is, which is a nonprofit in the United States that has like a list of providers that have experience treating these traits. They have a bunch of kind of diagnostic screening tools that you can use, I guess, on yourself or others, consenting people, and just
Hmm.
like a lot of information about it. They seem to be the only nonprofit in this area that is like dedicated to actually helping people with the condition or helping people to help others with the condition. So
That's brilliant.
finally, this I know it's only happened in the past
Finally,
couple
yeah.
years.
Oh my God, it's so needed. Like, I mean, it's needed not just for psychopaths, but for society as a whole. Like, I think people don't realize that, like, when you help people like this, you're also helping society at large.
I totally
Like
agree.
whatever disorder or mental health illness it is. The place that I would direct people to is Marsha Linehan. She's a woman who also has BPD, and she developed dialectical behavioral therapy, which is kind of rated as one
Wow.
of the best treatments for borderline. And I think it was like the thing formulated that actually proved, okay, you can recover from it. It was kind of like a breakthrough in borderline
Yes.
treatment. So
Uh-huh.
she has loads of skit like tools online. You could buy the book, Dialectical Behavioral Therapy book. But yeah, Marsha Linehan kind of is the
Wow.
source of all of that. Yeah.
I didn't realize she also was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. That's
Yeah, yeah,
crazy. Good
yeah.
for
Yeah.
her. She's like
Yeah.
basically like a cluster B saint.
Yes, she is. She is. But yeah, I mean, before that, we were kind of just written off, like lobotomized or whatever. So
Absolutely. I know. And you still are
it's
in the
not
California criminal justice system. It's like
okay.
sickening to me. Honestly, I'm like, this is like
Um,
so wrong. It
mm,
bothers me so much. And honestly,
yeah,
I blame these people though who like think emotionally.
yeah. You're like, that's the
I
law.
don't blame the people. I blame the tendency to just kind
Yeah,
of be like, yeah, sure, that works. Just keep them in jail or whatever. Where you're like,
yeah.
okay, like you
And
guys
it's
don't
not useful for society at
no.
large. Like it really isn't. It just creates more and more problems. So like, yes to changing this mindset and like fighting against it.
Yes, but I feel this way about psychopaths. I don't want it to swing
Yeah,
the
no,
other way so hard
no,
either,
no.
where it's
I was
like,
speaking
no,
inclusive of psychopaths as well.
yes,
Like,
yes, yes. Well, like I don't want it to be though where it's like it's okay to be like a raging psychopath untreated.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like it's fine that you are this, but like your behaviors, like I still have always advocated people are responsible for their behaviors to at least a certain
Yeah,
extent, and hopefully there's going to be like similar movements with psychopathy that we will
I hope
finally get
so.
a treatment recognized. I actually wonder if DBT will work for psychopaths.
Possibly.
I think
But I think it's great.
cognitive
Like,
behavioral therapy works pretty well. I think that's what my therapist
yeah,
did with me,
right.
if they're
Yeah,
like
it sounds
willing
like
to
you
do
had
it.
really positive results as well. And
Yeah.
yes, more.
Yeah.
um, yeah, and I think it's really like honestly, it's really great. Like your channel, and like there's starting to be like a few more psychopaths pop up and just like take the mask off and like be able to kind of express things and like debunk things, and like it's all positive steps towards
Yes.
hopefully like making more help available and just being more accepting.
Yeah, I think it's especially thank you so much for chatting me like with your own perspective because everybody's so different. I think that's what I started realizing when I started meeting
Mm,
others kind of psychopaths or like psychopath adjacent type people is that like I kind of expected everyone to look and talk like me. I don't know why.
yeah.
And some of them are just different. Like one of the things that surprised me is I do think there is a lot of gender fluidity and sexual orientation
Mm,
fluidity among psychopaths. I expected that to be just like 100% though. And then,
right.
there are people that I've met that are just like, not really or something. I think it's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
like, yeah, I'm sure like a variety of your other genes expressing
Yeah,
themselves,
yeah, yeah.
etc. And it's just so complex. And so to say, borderline always looks like this, is
Yeah.
like a disservice. And so like as many people that can come forward and be like, no, this is also me. I think is like helpful because people will identify with you in a way that they don't identify, for instance, maybe with, is it Marsha Linehan? Is that her
Yeah.
name?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks for giving me the platform to talk about it as well. I feel like that was
Yes.
very positive for both of us.
All right, I appreciate you, and we'll try to get you on a chat. We'll have to do like a 3-way chat.
Yeah. Yeah. If she's up for it, that would be
In
really
the
cool.
future. Sounds good. All right, chat
All
to you
right. Take
soon.
care. Bye.